The conversation surrounding Terence Crawford and David Benavidez has ignited waves in the boxing world, especially after Turki Alalshik floated the idea of staging the fight in 2026. The matchup instantly captured public imagination, pitting Crawford, widely regarded as pound-for-pound #1 and one of the sharpest technicians of his era, against Benavidez, the feared Mexican monster, a natural super middleweight who has since grown into a full light heavyweight frame. The dialogue across trainers, analysts, and insiders has been charged with both admiration and skepticism, as many weigh whether such a fight makes sense in terms of sporting merit, weight realities, and legacy management. When the idea first surfaced, reactions were divided. Crawford himself took a measured stance, analyzing the situation with the same level of calculation he applies inside the ring. For him, it was less about fear and more about facts. He openly acknowledged the skill of Benavidez, but emphasized the reality of size. In Crawford's words, Benavidez is no longer even a true 168-pound fighter, but someone who walks around at 175 pounds naturally. Crawford pointed out that cutting back down to super middleweight for such a fight would not only be brutal for Benavidez, but would strip the contest of authenticity. Crawford has always studied his prey carefully before stepping into the ring, and his cool analysis underlined his awareness of the risks involved. To him, Benavidez is talented and dangerous, yet the sheer physical difference looms too large for the fight to be practical in the immediate future. Analysts echoed this perspective, noting that while Crawford's skill set has allowed him to climb divisions and dismantle champions at every step, size still matters. The weight divide between a man who began his career at lightweight and one who has matured into a light heavyweight is stark. Some called the matchup more promotional fantasy than organic sporting clash. The history of boxing is full of super fights staged for spectacle, but the voices closest to Crawford argued that this one risked being just that, theater rather than sport. Greg Hackett was among those blunt about the matter. He noted that Benavidez's real trajectory had always been aimed at Canelo Alvarez when both men were active at super middleweight. Crawford, on the other hand, had never positioned himself toward Benavidez. Crawford's mission was to conquer weight classes strategically, first unifying at 140, then shocking the world at welterweight. Forcing the two into an intersecting path now, Hackett argued, was a construction of promoters, not the fighters' natural journeys. Benavidez himself addressed the issue with honesty. When asked whether he thought Crawford might fight him after certain matchups, he responded that he would not pursue Crawford, as he was now at 175 pounds and settled in that division. His answer confirmed what many insiders suspected. The days of him comfortably making 168 were behind him. In his view, cutting back down would not only weaken his body, but also derail the progress he was making at light heavyweight. That admission alone cast doubt on the viability of the matchup, despite the spectacle it promised. Coaches and insiders weighed in with layered takes. Coach Bredman explained the physical dynamics Crawford would face if he ever fought Benavidez. He described how Benavidez's natural length, pressure style, and capacity to build momentum in late rounds made him an exhausting opponent. Against most fighters, Crawford had used his reach, sharp counters, and timing to neutralize advantages. Against Benavidez, those usual edges would disappear, leaving Crawford with the need to rely almost solely on his ring IQ and adaptability. Bredman respected Crawford's brilliance, but still framed the matchup as physically grueling. The question wasn't whether Crawford could technically outthink Benavidez, it was whether he could handle the grind of doing so against someone so much bigger over 12 rounds. Jose Benavidez Sr., father and trainer of David, took a practical stance. He reminded people that his son was not only bigger but younger, fresher, and naturally suited to a heavier frame, while Crawford was approaching his late 30s. He respected Crawford's achievements and dominance, but warned that time and size were realities no fighter could escape. According to him, forcing David back down to 168 would make the fight less authentic. He acknowledged that Crawford was an all-time great, but suggested that Benavidez's youth and size could tilt the odds. His words captured the sentiment of many fans, admiration for Crawford's legacy paired with realism about the risks of matching him against a natural light heavyweight. Bomac, Crawford's longtime trainer, was even more dismissive of the idea. His response cut directly to the point. He emphasized that Team Crawford was not chasing Benavidez, nor were they interested in bending their trajectory to accommodate a spectacle. For Bomac, Crawford's career was about discipline, calculated steps, and meaningful challenges at the right time. He reminded people that Crawford had never decked opponents, instead climbing through divisions, unifying belts, and beating champions on their own turf. Taking a fight with Benavidez at this point, especially with Benavidez already moving into light heavyweight, would not align with that philosophy. Womack was clear. Crawford's legacy would not be risked for a promotional stunt. For him, it was not about fear, but about choosing challenges that made sense both sportingly and historically. Analysts also brought up the optics of weight manipulation. Forcing Benavidez to cut back down to super middleweight, they argued, would drain him and create a hollow spectacle. If Crawford won, critics would accuse Benavidez of being weakened by the weight cut. If Crawford lost, detractors would argue that he was simply too small to be in the ring with such a man. Either way, the fight risked being dismissed as inauthentic. True mega fights, they insisted, should feature both fighters at their best. Crawford's greatness had always come from beating men at their natural weight, not from contrived setups. To throw him into a fight under distorted conditions would cheapen the achievement, regardless of the outcome. The discussion also touched on the ambitions each fighter had. Benavidez's career focus had been on Canelo Alvarez for years. That fight was the logical pinnacle of his run at super middleweight. His move to 175 was not forced but natural, as his body matured and filled out. Crawford, meanwhile, had already surpassed expectations by unifying at 140, moving up to welterweight, and dominating there. His victory over Errol Spence Jr. cemented his reputation as pound-for-pound king. Crawford never needed to chase Benavidez, just as Benavidez never truly needed to chase Crawford. Their stories were running parallel, not converging. Turki Alalshik's call for the matchup was seen by some as an attempt to create history through sheer force of influence, regardless of whether the sporting logic supported it. As the debate deepened, some voices still left room for intrigue. They argued that if, one day, conditions aligned, perhaps through a catchweight agreement, or if Crawford chose to move up naturally, then the fight could indeed become one of the most daring challenges in modern boxing. They framed it as the ultimate test. Could Crawford's unmatched precision, timing, and tactical intelligence overcome a younger, bigger, relentless fighter like Benavidez? Conversely, could Benavidez's pressure and power break through the defenses of a man whose composure and adaptability had frustrated every opponent? The contrast of styles, they said, would be electric. Yet even they admitted that the fight was not viable right now, at least not in a way that respected both fighters' natural conditions. Another angle explored was the impact of age. Crawford, by the time such a fight could realistically be staged, would be nearing 40. While age brings experience, it also inevitably reduces reflexes and stamina. Crawford's sharp counters and slick movements depend on timing, and though his ring IQ is timeless, physical decline is universal. Facing a fighter like Benavidez, who thrives on high volume, constant pressure, and youthful energy, would be a brutal assignment for someone at that stage of his career. For Crawford, who has built his greatness on choosing the right fights at the right time, stepping into that kind of scenario might risk tarnishing what he has already achieved. Still, others highlighted Crawford's history of defying expectations. They recalled how he was underestimated at 140 before unifying the division, and again at welterweight before dismantling Errol Spence. Crawford has always been the fighter who solved puzzles that others thought were unsolvable. His adaptability, ability to read opponents, and willingness to adjust mid-fight have been his greatest strengths. Against Benavidez, those same tools would be tested at the highest possible level. The intrigue lay not only in whether Crawford could withstand the physical difference, but also in whether Benavidez's style would leave him open to Crawford's razor-sharp counters. Benavidez throws punches in high volume, often leaving himself vulnerable in exchanges. For a master like Crawford, such moments could provide opportunities to turn the tide, even against a larger opponent. The weight issue remained the sticking point throughout the debate. Time and again, insiders circled back to the fact that Benavidez was now a full 175-pounder. Cutting down to 168, they argued, would not be realistic or healthy. At the same time, asking Crawford to jump to 175 from welterweight would be too drastic. The gap was simply too wide to bridge naturally. The only possible compromise, some suggested, was a catchweight, but even that brought complications. What weight could both agree on that did not disadvantage one fighter disproportionately? No clear answer emerged, reinforcing the idea that the matchup, though tantalizing in theory, was impractical in practice. Beyond logistics, the conversation also touched on the philosophy of greatness. Crawford's career has been defined by daring moves across divisions, but always with a sense of timing and calculation. He never chased fights recklessly. Instead, he positioned himself to conquer belts, unify divisions, and establish dominance step by step. Benavidez's path has been different, marked by raw talent, pressure fighting, and the looming shadow of Canelo. For both men, their legacies are still being shaped, and forcing them together prematurely could distort what they are each building. Crawford's camp reiterated that their goal was not to chase spectacle, but to cement legacy through discipline. Benavidez, meanwhile, was focused on establishing himself as a force at light heavyweight, where his size and style could flourish. Throughout the back and forth, Turki Alalshik's role remained central. His influence and ability to stage mega events cannot be denied. He has the financial and promotional power to create spectacles that transcend boxing. But even with that, the reality of weight, timing, and career arcs cannot be ignored. His vision of Crawford versus Benavidez may come to life one day, but insiders stress that if it does, it must happen under fair conditions. Otherwise, it risks being remembered as a stunt rather than a true contest of greatness. In the end, the debate crystallized into a few clear points. Crawford is a master technician, a pound-for-pound king whose skill, timing, and composure make him dangerous to anyone. Benavidez is a relentless powerhouse, now a natural light heavyweight, whose youth, size, and stamina make him a threat to all at 175. A fight between them would be a collision of styles, eras, and physical realities. But for it to mean something in boxing history, it must happen on terms that allow both men to be at their best. Until then, it will remain more a point of conversation than a necessity in the sport. Those who favor the fight dream of a spectacle that pits size against skill in its purest form. They imagine Crawford, the smaller man, dissecting the Mexican monster with precision, and they imagine Benavidez overwhelming the master technician with raw volume and pressure. Those against it caution that the conditions simply do not support such a contest right now, and that boxing deserves fights that preserve authenticity, not just generate headlines. As Crawford's trainer Bomac said, every move must be calculated, not reactive. That patience has carried Crawford to the pinnacle of the sport, and it may ultimately decide whether he and Benavidez ever meet under terms that truly honor their legacies. In this sense, the debate surrounding Crawford and Benavidez is less about whether the fight could happen and more about what it represents. It reflects the tension between promotion and sport, between spectacle and authenticity, and between the natural progression of careers and the temptation to force history. Crawford's journey from lightweight to pound-for-pound king has already defied the odds. Benavidez's rise from super middleweight to light heavyweight promises even greater challenges ahead. Whether their paths ever cross fairly remains to be seen. But for now, the voices are clear. Respect the fighters, respect the weight, and respect the legacy. Until those align, the idea of Crawford versus Benavidez will remain an enticing dream, not a realistic reality.